Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
But I wanted to just for one segment, we appreciate him joining us here on short notice. I wanted to get James Dillingpole on because I saw with horror today that the lower house, even though upwards of 90% in the polls I've seen are against this in Australia and different governments have been thrown out in the last few years, the implementation of the carbon taxes has already bankrupt many of the sheep farmers, beef farmers, but now they're going to jack up the taxes, and I've got a breakdown per household, home inspectors, and you can just type into the search engine under carbon tax, green police to inspect home without warrants. So just unleashing the Soviets, unleashing a new 21st century Bolshevism for the bankers. And it says, protests disrupt question time after carbon bill passes the lower house. And James Dillingpole, writing for The Telegraph, he also writes for a lot of other big publications and is a best-selling author, says Australia commits suicide. Yeah, no one, I mean, this is meant to create a post-industrial world. And, of course, the big globalist mafia, they're all exempt, like General Electric, from their own carbon taxes they write up here with Ken Lay and Goldman Sachs here in the U.S. So going now to James Dillingpole, joins us to break this down. I agree with you. Australia is committing suicide right now. Even though the public doesn't want it, these are authoritarians. So tell us exactly what's happened.
You've got Julia Gillard's coalition administration passing by a very slender majority, I think 74 votes to 72, this tax on Australia, which almost none of the people want except for a few liberals in the cities, a tax on carbon which is going to destroy the Australian economy. And the reason is that of all the world's major economies, none is more dependent on fossil fuels than Australia. And the reason for that is Australia is an island of coal, an island of minerals, an island of gas, an island of oil. Australia has got lots of fossil fuels. It makes sense for a country like that to use its natural resources. So here is Julia Gillard, against the wishes of the Australian people, as the world enters the worst depression ever, probably, imposing this tax, which is going to be a tax on everything, because everything in Australia is to do with carbon. Now, what's interesting about Australia is I think it's a kind of bellwether for the rest of us. You know, it's not just about this swinging tax on carbon. You remember the case a few months ago of the Australian farmer who went on hunger strike to protest about the way that his land was not his land. He'd bought this farmland, but he couldn't clear it of trees because the trees in Australia have been declared a carbon sink, which means that effectively private property has been abolished in Australia. You can't clear your own land of trees. There was another case where a farmer who had cleared his trees around his house as a fire break was fined by the federal authorities for clearing the trees away from his land. And guess what happened? A fire broke out. This guy was the only guy for miles around whose house wasn't burned down because he had sensibly cleared those trees illegally.
Unbelievable. And I saw 2 years ago, sheep farmers under the first regimen of this, because they always jack it up, tying himself to a tower for months in a hunger strike because he has to pay a tax on every sheep he has for their flatulence. They're saying the methane is evil. And they're taking half his land off limits that he paid for, that had been in his family for generations. This is so incredible. And then it's cold-blooded in that insiders get exemptions from it. So it makes the government and the regional governments like these mafia dons where no one can operate with them.
There is a battle going on for the soul of Australia, just as there's a battle going on all around the world. It's happening in America, it's happening in Britain. What's interesting about Australia, I suppose, is that we now have in Australia an opposition party which is absolutely committed to undoing the damage which has been done by this carbon tax. You know, Tony Abbott, the opposition leader, has vowed in blood, he says, that he will repeal this carbon tax as soon as he gets into power. And I think given the unpopularity of this carbon tax, he will get into power. It'd be very interesting to see what happens to Australia when it becomes part of the resistance to this global warming craze. You know, all this stuff that's being imposed on us by the New World Order of the United Nations and so on. If Australia tries to resist this nonsense, as I believe it will, what will the rest of the world economies do? Will they try and punish Australia? You know, if there are still people like Obama running America, for example, you know, if the EPA still has power, what's going to happen to Australia? But I like to think that Australia will prove the leader of the resistance in 2 years' time, and that's a good thing. I respect those Australians. I think people power will ultimately decide.
Well, I mean, I've seen polls over the last few years, scientific ones, between 75 and 90%. It's wildly unpopular. I know some previous governments fell because of it, but their mission to bring in this tyranny is so key that they went ahead and rammed it through regardless. Now, at least there, they've passed it through their parliament, through their government. Here, it doesn't pass Congress, so Obama just does it and then gives his friends waivers from it. And then in your country, David Cameron, for those that don't know, is supporting carbon taxes. So it doesn't matter what party you vote for, unless it's against UKIP.
There is a complete democratic deficit in most of the world where this eco-fascism is concerned. In Britain, all the three major political parties are committed to decarbonising Britain, to imposing these swinging taxes and regulations on us in the name of saving us from a problem that doesn't exist. In the US, you have a similar problem in that Obama bypasses the democratic process by using his boot boys in the EPA to circumvent the democratic process. So you have no democracy. This stuff is being imposed on you against your will.
And the front runners are all carbon tax lovers, especially Mitt Romney, now endorsed by Chris Christie. And I tell conservatives, hey, you know, Al Gore thanks him, and he also is the author of Socialist Health Care. And they say, well, we like socialism as long as it's a Republican that looks like a Ken doll. And I just say, but I mean, he's also for gun control. And they say, I'm ready to turn him in. I mean, what's wrong with these people?
I fear that too. I'm looking to, I look to America because things are so dismal here in Europe. I look across to America thinking, well, at least something is going to get changed when Obama gets defenestrated. But I look at your lead candidate at the moment for to take over. I don't think Romney is the answer. I really don't.
Doesn't he seem like he's a David Cameron clone?
He does seem like Alex in one, and that is my fear. He is David Cameron Redux, and that is not what you want, America, believe me.
Now, why do you think the power elite want this, to the point of, the front runner they want in America is just like David Cameron? He might as well be Al Gore. He just has different rhetoric. Why does the ruling elite, it's not just a bunch of hippies running around that want to rob rich people. Why does the elite want this?
Because the managerial elite wants somebody who is not going to rock the boat, quite simply. They do not want a radical in power. They do not want a game changer. They do not want somebody who believes in something crazy like restoring the gold standard or anything like that. They want somebody who can continue as before and hand out the special favors to the special interest groups. They want another corporatist, a corporatist Republican like W was. Both Bushes were corporatists.
I agree. Briefly, what's your view on Ron Paul?
Ron Paul, I think he comes up with some very sensible stuff on domestic politics. I'm not totally convinced about some of the things. I did not shed a tear for the assassination of al-Awlaki. I'm sorry, I know some of your listeners will disagree with that. I don't give a toss about that guy being offed. I do, however, agree with him on sound money. And Alex, I believe that the issue of sound money is going to be the defining issue of our lifetimes. I think this is the thing.
Well, that and the global warming, people. But I agree with you, from following Australia from afar and getting the phone calls. This is the issue that's got them hopping mad to really see the tyranny. And now I was reading Sydney Morning Herald. They're starting home inspections without warrants and bossy bureaucrats. The more they squeeze, the more resistance it's going to form. Of course, James Illingpole is at jamesillingpole.com. He writes for The Times, Daily Telegraph, and The Spectator. And his new book is Watermelons, exposing the fact they're green on the outside, commie on the inside. James, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. Good to be on the show.
Good to have you on with us. Wow. Yeah, so Australia committing suicide. They're certainly trying to. The ruling class is. I mean, they're putting in the worst carbon taxes I've ever seen. California's doing it. And look at California going to Hades in a handbasket. We're going to come back, get into the economy briefly. Then I'm getting into the big news. Fast and Furious tied into this fake Iran terror plot. Stay with us. It's all coming up. I'm Alex Jones, GCNlive.com.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?